And it's time. Thank you very much for coming to this meeting of the Subcommittee on Refuse Collection and Resource Recovery. This is the 6th meeting. We are talking just 1 hour for this meeting, and there are just 2 items. One, proposal to provide a community recycling center at the reprovisioned refuse collection point in Hau Cheung Street. The other is a draft report of this subcommittee. We'd like your input on the report because for today's discussion item is not included in the draft report yet. So first of all, let's invite the administration in. Thank you very much for coming. We have new faces today. Thank you very much for coming to the meeting. First of all, starting from Mr. Chen, I would like to thank Mr. Andy Chen, Assistant Director, Recycling Support Acting of the Environmental Protection Department, Ms. Hinny Lam, Assistant Director, Waste Management Policy of the EPD, and Mr. Fok Peng Lam, Assistant Director, Operations Free of the Food and Environmental Hygiene Department, whom we know very well, for all coming to the meeting. So on the reprovisioning of the RCP in Hau Cheung Street, I wonder if the administration has anything to report, or a brief introduction perhaps. A brief one will do. Although we have a short meeting, but we do have ample of time today. I think it's Mr. Chen, right, Assistant Director, to take us through the paper. Yes, here. Yes, please. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members. Perhaps taking this opportunity, I'd like to briefly introduce the information to you. We've already provided paper, so I will only be very brief and concise. The government is determined to tackle the waste challenges in Hong Kong. We have laid out a clear strategy for a multi-pronged approach to, most importantly, want to reduce waste at source, so we are going to do more there. And on source separation of waste, since 2005, we have started distributing the free tricolor bins, and 80% of the population is now served by these tri-colored bins. There are 2,000 housing estates and residential buildings and 900 commercial buildings with these bins. We've also set up a community recycling network. There are 18 community recycling centers, mostly to help the single block buildings in providing them with recycling support. And as you know, across the territory in the 18 districts, we would like to set up a network of community green stations, CGS. In 2017, there are 4 CGS in Sha Tin Eastern District, Kwun Tong, and Yuen Long. And then for Sam Shui Po, that will be commissioned soon, later this year. On support and facilities for recycling. Well, focus is on recycling of plastic bottles because the value of recycling is lower. That's why we would like to give focus support to recycling of plastic bottles. And then next year, in the beginning of 2018, we would like to extend the community recycling network. So far, we have been focusing on single block buildings, but we would like to expand that scope to cover other housing estates or residential buildings. In the long run, as we pointed out, there's little value in recycling plastic bottles, and that's why we have plans to introduce a central recycling facilities. So in the 18 community recycling centers, we'll focus on collecting waste plastic bottles, and if necessary, we will consider going directly to the residential buildings and housing estates to collect the waste plastic bottles. But we believe publicity and education are the most important, because for recyclables, if they're not clean, then they may not be very much useful. So in the fourth quarter of this year or early next year, we will have publicity and education effort focusing on waste plastic bottles in the next round. So we would like to educate the public on what they can do better to help the recycling of waste plastic bottles. And then we're going to set up an outreach team at the community level. They could reach out to the residential estates and demonstrate to residents how they could treat the recyclables properly before disposal. For the recycling fund, since 2015, we've set up a $1 billion recycling fund. So far, there are 125 projects approved. The total amount subsidized as a grant is $72 million. For the Hau Cheung waste reduction and recycling support, in 2014, in Hau Cheung District, we set up a community recycling center in Tai Kwok Choi for the collection of low-value recyclables. And then for the CGS, we have planned to set up one in Hau Cheung District. When we have more information, we will go to report to the Hau Cheung District Council. About the Yau Ma Tei Theatre Phase 2 development, that's under the charge of the Home Affairs Bureau. We understand there will be expansion and improvement of the YMTT facilities, so the theatre could play a better role in nurturing talents. And this the improvement will also bring about overall improvement to the environment in the area. Now, we understand that this has been discussed at the Home Affairs panel since 2013, and then the project has been raised at the Public Works Subcommittee and Finance Committee, and the design has been changed several times in the light of members' views. And we understand that both stakeholders and members would like to see the completion of this project as soon as possible. Therefore, if we do another new design of the project at this stage, that would lead to delay in the completion of the project. So for Phase 2 development of Yau Ma Tei Theatre, there will be delay, and then for the street sleepers shelter units and other services could not be improved in time. So if there is a further delay of the project, the project scope may be increased, and then the completion time will be delayed while the cost will go up. So that's all I'd like to say for the time being. Thank you. Next, questions from members. I have questions too. Mr. Wu Chi-wai, and then Mr. Leung Yu-chung, and then Mr. Eddie Chu. Thank you. Mr. Wu, 5 minutes perhaps for now, but I will be liberal in enforcing the time rule. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think what we're most concerned about is that recently on the mainland, there are new, well, perhaps not new, but there are now tighter enforcement standards for waste being exported to the mainland. There are now additional requirements for the quality of the materials to be exported to the mainland, or to be imported to the mainland rather. So there are there are recyclables now collected by recyclers, paper or other waste. As now the pressure is building up because of this tighter requirements. So is there any strategy in response to that on the part of the government? What about the waste now in the hands of the recyclers? Can I ask this question? Of course you can, but it depends on whether he's able to answer that question. Because he talked about clean recycling. I thought he knew about it. I don't know, because you mentioned waste paper as well. So let's see if he could answer the question, because everyone's concerned about it, of course. So it's a good question. this is issue arising from clean recycling. To some extent in the past, for recyclables accepted by the mainland, the quality is not so high. That's why for very low cost, the recycling operation could be run. And I understand the recyclable is rather dirty and there's not proper sorting of waste, plastic, paper, whatever. That's been the case in the past. So my question is, let's deal with waste paper first because that's the most imminent issue. So do you have any strategy? Or do you have any information at hand? How are you going to deal with this problem? Because now it's a deadlock. And my apology, no problem. Now with recycling is really all about some sorting. When we talk about clean recycling, every time I came to a meeting of this sort here, I heard that we must step up publicity and education. But it really cannot, but we couldn't really achieve it. So are there other strategies to promote clean recycling? If we cannot achieve clean recycling, the receiving countries or cities, if they then raise the standards, that means our recyclables would all end up in the landfill. So it's a dead end. So do you have any strategy apart from the CGS, apart from publicity? Do you have any other measures up your sleeve? If not, how are you going to deal with the trend that various receiving countries are gradually tightening the standards of recyclables that could be imported into these countries? And what about Hong Kong? Could there be the case that people send waste to Hong Kong, claiming that in Hong Kong we will do the demolition or the dismantling here for retrieving the recyclables? And well, how are you going to follow up on that? And are you ready for Hong Kong to be such a hub? Mr. Chen, thank you. I'll try my. Thank you for the questions. I'll try to speak on the mainland policy about waste paper. I think it was in mid-July, an announcement was made by the State Environmental Protection Agency telling the WHO that starting from the 1st of January 2018, there are 40 materials that could not be imported into the mainland. And so we actively liaised with the industry. We had sharing sessions with the recycling industry in collaboration with the Recycling Fund. We're trying to find out what the difficulties are for the recyclers. And then at the end of last month, we went to Beijing to speak directly to the SCPA. We want to find out more. For waste paper, we understand the standards on the mainland have been raised for unsorted waste paper that could not be imported into the mainland come next year. But for properly sorted waste paper, importation is permitted, but of course they must still seek approval and so on. But so in short, the mainland would accept properly sorted waste paper. And there are three main categories of waste paper. One is newspaper. The second, carton boxes. And third type, A4 paper, a paper used in office and so on. So if there is proper sorting of the three categories of waste paper, then recyclers could get approval to send this paper to the mainland. So we hope the recycling industry would leverage on this opportunity to improve their quality, because we've been encouraging them to do so. So in terms of land resources, we have the public cargo works area. We already have recycling sites for recyclers to use these PCWs and for them to do a bit of sorting. So we would like to give them more support through the recycling fund in terms of the facilities like the building facilities and other machinery.
Okay. I would like to follow up. Can you pause? I am asking you, do you know about the situation whereby the recyclers have stored the waste paper which cannot be exported to the mainland? What kind of condition is it in? Is there any way that we can sort it? Well, let's save that for the next round. Yes, please continue. Well, please be more targeted in your answer. Well, in terms of the waste paper, we communicate regularly with the recyclers. We hope that for the waste paper, it can be stored for now somewhere. And on the part of the government, we want to do more with the storage space. We want to do something at Tuen Mun, the Eco Park, and also Nim Wan. We have prepared some reserve storage space. We have 5 to 6 plots of land which can be made available for use, and we are willing to lease it or rent it out to these recyclers for their temporary storage, because all of a sudden they couldn't export their waste paper and they need temporary storage space. So we want to help the recyclers on that front. And also we want to communicate with the mainland counterparts to try to understand the latest situation and also the documentation needed for the recyclers and see how we can help. So we are working on all these fronts. Thank you. Now, for these 24 categories of waste banned or where standards will be tightened, this is going to be a big problem. We will have a new panel in the next session. We are one of the panels which will convene the meetings at the earliest. So I think you need to give us a more detailed explanation by then. You are just scratching the surface of the problem by the way you're going to resolve it. You are not tackling the source of the problem. And we may even see workers being out of job because of this. Now, how can we help the workers who are in the trade? So we may be facing a lot of difficulties. So, Mr. Leung Yiu-chung, the next one. Thank you, Madam Chair. 5 minutes. Well, you are right, Chairman. Temporary storage is no solution. You are just placing the waste paper in a temporary area. And I think the price will go up, definitely, because the cost will go up. Now, there will be more transport, higher transport costs, definitely. So the government, if you just find identified sites for them to store the waste paper on a temporary basis, that doesn't suffice. You have to tackle the issue of transport as well, and also how long the problem is going to last. And I am just afraid that the problem will only worsen. So please try to reassure the trade by doing something. I think members of the public are also concerned as well, because the waste paper will only be accumulated further. Okay, going back to this main subject about Yang Ma Tei RCP. Now, you said that if you accede to Mr. Eddie Yu's request to set up a community recycling center, the cost will go up and the project will be delayed. I don't get it. Now, if it is turned into a community recycling center, how much longer will the project last, and what about the rise in the cost? Do you have any figures to share with us? Mr. Chan. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Leung, for your question. Mr. Leung referred to two things. We understand that we are now providing temporary land plots is not a long-term solution, but this thing just happened so suddenly, and we are trying to follow up on all aspects, and for us and for the recycling funds and the recyclers, and we are working tirelessly to come up with solutions and try to help the trade. So please allow us some time to work on it further, and in appropriate time in the future we will follow up with the panel. And so many things are happening at the same time. This is a fact, very much a fact. Now, Mr. Leung asked about the provision of recycling center in Yang Mai. What impact will it have on the design? Now, for this project, it was spearheaded by the HAB, and the RHSD, Architectural Services Department, came up with the design. We didn't actually participate in the early stage of the project, and the HAB's information shows that there have been several revisions to the design in the past few years, spanning from 2013 to 2017, and there have been several major rounds of changes to the design. And they told us that if we go back on the design at this juncture, then they need time to reconsider the design, and because of this, the timetable has to be pulled back, and also the cost will rise. But we don't have detailed information on hand. We were given the information by the HAB, and they told us if there are going to be further revisions to the design, there will be a rise in the cost, and also the timetable will be delayed. Well, since you don't have information, we don't get an idea of how serious, the impact will be if we are going to have a design change. Maybe we don't need that much design revision. Maybe we just have a design of a warehouse or storage space, and that would be it. Well, maybe one of the major changes will be in the design of the lift, because we have to get up to the upper floors, and maybe we don't need major revisions to the original design. And also we don't know what extra time will be needed. Say, if you say that would take, say, half a year or a year, or if the cost is going to be 10 times higher than the present cost, then that's going to be a problem. But then you seem to be saying all these on the assumption that there will be a change, a delay in the timetable, and also a rising cost. So if you don't have detailed information for us, it's difficult for us to say whether we should change it or not. All right, 2 questions. Any response? Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, we were given information by the HAB. I don't have anything to add on top of that. Indeed, we don't know the extra time needed or the extra cost involved. But all we were told is that for any change to be made, then definitely the timetable will be affected. Now, if we are going to have a community recycling center, who will be the responsible department, FEHD or EPD, and who will be setting the requirements and so on? Mr. Falk, the AD of FEHD, said previously that in fact we discussed this, if we are going to change our present design, then it will be very difficult. But if we are really to have another round of revision, then which department is going to be responsible? We don't have an answer to that. So can we ask them to tell us later on whether they are prepared to do that or not? Well, when it comes to my speaking time, then I will be asking these questions myself. Mr. Leung, do you have a follow-up question? If not, then we'll have a next round, and then it will be Mr. Eddie Chu, Mr. Ted Hood, and myself. Thank you, Madam Chair. I am also following on Hau Cheung Street. I have some information myself in response to Mr. Leung Yu Chung's point. I've asked ASD for the drawing plans, the building plans. I wonder whether you have them or not. Now, why I propose this idea, there are 2 reasons. First, for this 4-story building, or 4 to 5-story building in Hau Cheung Street. They want to separate the street sleepers services units and the RCP, so they are putting in between 2 extra floors. I think they are sort of neither here nor there in terms of the purposes. The first floor will be used for the storage space. There will be 3 rooms, and it will be accessible by a goods lift. And then above it, that will be the office for the LCSD's IT office. Now, well, my proposal is that the IT office can stay, but for the storage space proposed, I think we can look at it from another perspective. And it seems that no specific purposes is really set for this storage space in a way. So my thinking is that it should be used for a purpose which is more related to, say, the RCP purpose, and also help with the government's overall direction of having more recycling. Now, Mr. Wu Cheung Hoi referred to this recent crisis. You talk about the CGS all the time. Well, for every district there are tens of thousands of residents, and you have 1 in each district, and now only 4 are up and running. And the recycling materials weigh only 1 ton per day now. So I think we must identify more space for recycling. I think that space can also be tailor-made in a way. If you don't think obnoxious facilities should be put there, maybe you can recycle materials which are not dirty. For example, clothing, recovering of clothing, furniture, and also household supplies, second-hand household supplies, etc. The EPD has a dedicated website for doing that, but well, the virtual world is no way comparable to actually a physical location where people can actually look at the supplies or the materials, items themselves. So the Hau Cheung Streets are very much a NIMBY facilities. One is the RCP, the other one is the SSSU. So you lump them all together. I think you should be renewing your thinking. Well, RCPs are not necessarily obnoxious facilities. You can turn it around and try to change its function, try to enhance its recycling function so that people can actually go there and look for second-hand goods that they would like to have. So I think this is the background to my proposal. Please, the government don't, well, brush aside my idea. I don't think you have carefully considered my proposal. You're just using the HAB's information as a pretext for not doing it. So please consider Hau Cheung Street and my proposal. And also, in Hon CHU Hoi-dick Street in NT West, I wonder whether Mr. Fogg knows about this. There will be a 6-story RCP to be built, and the ground floor will be used for RCP. But for the 2nd to the 5th floors, I can tell you now, FHD, think about it. Consider adding more functions to the new RCPs, so that these facilities can tie in with your overall environmental protection policy, so that not too much refuse will end up in the landfills. So I hope that the EPD and the FHD can respond to my proposals. So please reconsider these. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. G, for your comment. Let me try to respond briefly to Mr. G's points. First, indeed, the HAB's information shows that if at this stage, at this very late stage, if there will be changes to the project, there will be an impact on the timetable and also the cost. As I said, I don't have detailed information on hand, and maybe I will talk to the HAB in the future. Mr. Chu, yeah, I'm just thinking that we might not need to actually change the design. Well, we are already having this storage space, 3 rooms, and also a lift. Well, we just can make use of these facilities and turn it into a recycling center. Mr. G advocates that it be done in a simpler way. And can you respond to whether there is room for you to just change the use without changing the design. Let me supplement. Well, you understand the procedures for the works items, and this is a reprovisioning item spearheaded by the HAB, and in our paper it is mentioned that in the past few years there have been a lot of discussion on the item, and at the district, especially the Hau Cheung District Council, the residents that they have different views on the project, and at the electrical, the HA panel and also the PWSC and the Finance Committee have repeatedly discussed the design, as far as I understand. Now we've come to this stage of having this new proposal, which is acceptable by all sides. The PWSC at its meeting on the 28th of June already endorsed this project. And this project was supposedly be discussed at the FC in mid-July, but then it didn't get discussed, and later on it will be put on the agenda of the FC again. The HAB has decided that it will be for the 2 floors in the middle. It will be used by the LCCSD for office and storage uses. And for the project, it has been discussed at the district and at various panels and committees of the electrical. When we talked to the HAB, well, the HAB actually, we told them about the latest proposal from the legislator, and they said that if there is a change in the use, then consultation has to be done all over again, and that takes time, and the construction cost may be different as well. The HAB is the project proponent, so they have no plan to change the design, and they have not expended any further resources to make an assessment of the implications of Mr. Chu's suggestion. Mr. Chu talked about the district support at the district level. Mr. Chen at the outset talked about the district level work and so on. And through the CGS and through the CRC, we are doing a lot, but well, these initiatives are at their starting stage, and maybe not much has been done. But anyway, at Hau Cheung, we want to start the CGS project as soon as possible. In terms of the selection of the location, we have sought the views of the district council, and the district council has given us different views. We would follow up on all of these.
Perhaps it's easier for the Urban Redevelopment Council to add or subtract items. Anyway, any comments, please? Further comments, please? Or yes, Hon CHU, opposite Hon CHU. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chu, for the question. Mr. Falk, please turn on Mr. Falk's microphone. Okay, can you hear me? For the Hong Folk Village, or we plan to set up refuse collection point there. Yeah, it will be the most modern design, and it won't be heavy load, but still we're receiving increasing opposition. Mr. Chu, I'm sure, has been to the residents' meetings organized by concerned groups. If we just build a totally enclosed RCP already, there is so much objection. What if we say we're going to put a recycling center there? Then I believe it will be even more difficult to secure local support. And if we want to set up a recycling center, is not really within the jurisdiction of the FHD. Now, of course, RCP is under our charge, but if it's a recycling center or CGS in the RCP, then that's not something for the FHD to take up. Now, I have a brief question as well for the community recycling centers. So, is it under your department or the EPD, or are you going to collaborate? Can I find out more, Mr. Falk? Have the two departments of Bureau looked for suitable sites for recycling? Last week we told the news came that maybe starting from this Monday, the recyclers will stop collecting waste paper. Now, that was a seminar last week, and there were some SMEs present. They were saying that the threshold for the eco park is too high, it's $30 million. And then Mr. Eddie Chu said there should be smaller sites that could help these smaller operators. For example, Eco Park, maybe could divide up the space into smaller lots so the threshold won't be so high. And then for perhaps for the community recycling centers, they could be combined with the CGS, and then they can all function more properly. Because so far we haven't got really good response about the CGS, to be honest. So if you continue to take forward this project, have you reviewed what are the problems with the CGS? And if you're going to have a CGS in Hau Cheung, what is it for? Education or collection or both? Maybe for waste plastic bottles, they have to go to other recycling centers. But would they also be accepted at the CGS? So I'd like to find out more. And then on clean recycling, are you only going to ask people to adopt a clean recycling end of this year, early next year? And you're only talking about plastic exchanges now. We're so far behind other places. So can we not move a bit more quickly? Because it should be something really straightforward. Even in kindergartens, we can learn about it. Why must you want to push it back till so late? If you would just do APIs on TV, it's easy for people to understand. Why must you wait? You're saying that you can't even guarantee what will happen at the end of the year, maybe it'll be early next year, but why does it take so long? Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try to answer the question on CGS, and then my colleague, Ms. Lam, could follow up, could supplement. Now, for the 18 community recycling centers under the EPD, we work with non-profit organizations or social enterprises. There are not some specific government land in support of this effort, but of course CRC and CGCs differ in terms of scale and so on. As for the Eco Park, it's not the same as the community recycling centers. There are now 13 sites granted in the Eco Park. We only have about 4 more sites, not that many. The Eco Park is to support the recycling industry so they could invest in high value added and high tech operations. For instance, if it's just a simple sorting or baling and packing, we believe these are not the operations meant for the Eco Park. So if we're talking about advanced investment in advanced technology, $30 million is not really a high threshold. For example, in our recent round of tendering, we received many tenders for the site. So it goes to show that the Eco Park is popular among the industry. On clean recycling, we started a few years ago. We're still working on it, but we have found that it's not been very effective. That's why in the coming round we want to be more focused on publicity and APIs, as the chairperson mentioned. We are actually producing the APIs, but even for APIs, there's a queue for them to be broadcast on radios and TV. And the slot we get now is for the 4th quarter, October, November. So we're already producing the API. Now is an API on waste plastic. And then we're going to have another API on clean recycling of waste paper. So we are doing it step by step. Thank you. On resources recycling, as Edici suggested, that is, you do a recycling of resources at RCPs. Which bureau or department is responsible? Has there been any discussion? Well, with the FEHD colleagues, we've been in close liaison. When they have new RCPs, for instance, during the design or tendering stage, they would talk to us first, and then we'll see whether there's any room for collaboration. But when it comes to the actual division of work, at this stage, we have not yet had concrete discussion. Mr. McFock, anything to add, please? Well, it's still the same point. The FHG is not in charge of operating recycling centers. That's not part of our jurisdiction. Thank you. Next, Mr. Hui Chi Fong. Exactly, that's the point I want to mention. On many occasions, many meetings in the past, groups have proposed putting a recycling center in the RCP, but you've been passing the buck, if I could put it bluntly. Of course, I know there's some specific division of work. So you need to tell the public first whether you have such a policy. You, of course, do not have such a policy now. But would you take on board our views and start studying into such a policy? So in future, what if we could put RCPs and recycling centers together? Then you could decide who is going to be the coordinator, how you're going to share the responsibilities, and so on. So for RCP, they could also become recycling centers in future. And of course, both bureau and departments have to coordinate among yourselves, which is to do what. So you need to tell us specifically whether you support this approach. If so, then you tell us you're prepared to do it. If not, tell us you don't agree. Because all along you've been referring to technical considerations. You said that there are refuse collection vehicles going in and out. It may pose a danger. But say for Hau Cheung Street, it doesn't involve RCVs. People take the lift to go up. It's a separate access. But then you say it's a technical issue, it's a matter of consultation, it's a matter of timeline, and so on. So all these are just excuses, really. And fine. I agree. We only raised this idea for Hau Cheung Street at a rather late stage. So to be fair. But what about new districts? Do you have such a policy? Yes or no? Just tell us. You can't keep passing the buck. And then, of course, you may need to discuss it among the departments and bureau. That's the first point. Second point, the mainland has raised the bar for accepting recycled waste. I have heard that the department has taken various measures. For example, relaxing the requirements so people could buy the machines. But then some have said that even if you give them money to buy the machinery, they don't have room to put them. So, okay, you are relaxing the rules. You are giving funds to people to buy machine. On your part, do you think this is just emergency measure? Or do you want them to stay in business in the long run? Or perhaps structurally speaking, there's no chance for these businesses to survive. You need to show me the long-term vision. At this stage, the support you're giving them, tell us what it is, if that's enough or not enough, or what more you're going to do, what your commitments are. So please tell us. Mr. Chen. Thank you. Madam Chair and the member. The position of the EPD is that we have all along believed that the most effective measure is to separate waste at source. So that means at the household level, office level, residents will first separate the waste and then put the waste into different recycling bins. We do not believe it is appropriate to do sorting and separation halfway. For instance, if you want to do that in a single location, then we will need a lot of space. And it may not actually be practicable. For instance, it may not be practicable to sort waste at landfills because the waste would have all been mixed up. That's why we encourage the public to separate waste at source. And that's why we don't see the need for recycling centers at the district level for the time being. That's our position now. And then the member also asked about the mainland waste control on the procurement of equipment and machinery. Now, we've actually had a discussion with the industry at the brainstorming session. We asked the industry what immediate support they might need, and then that's why within a very short time we roll out this scheme. So recyclers could submit the application, and before the application is granted, they could already buy the machinery. Hopefully then it could help their operation as far as possible. And we are more than prepared to listen to the views of the industry. We keep in constant discussion with the recyclers. If they have any views, in any way the government or the recycling fund could help them, we would do so to support their operations. Thank you.
Thank you. We should have be discussing this item till 11:30, but I think the next agenda will not take too long. So maybe we will allow for some more time to discuss this. Mr. Wu Chi Wai, Mr. Eddie Ju, will you ask again? Yes? Well, if you don't mind, then I will allow members 4 minutes each. Mr. Wu Chi Wai. Thank you, Madam Chair. The EPD told us your stance, and you said that you want to have clean recycling and source separation of waste. We've heard this for so long, but what about their effectiveness, strategies, goals? Have you set all these, or you just go on forever with your publicity work only? Now, in the last term and also in this term, I've been suggesting that you should model after the practices in some other cities, right? Say, for example, in Taipei, well, ultimately, they have to offer economic incentives to deal with the problem so that people are induced to participate in recycling. People from different backgrounds and educational attainment can participate. You'll be able to pool everyone's efforts to do source separation of waste and clean recycling, but you haven't done so all along. You've told us that you have CGS. You said that you will produce APIs. You are not saying this only today. You've been discussing this for a long time. The recyclables come with their own market value. If there is clean recycling, really there is a way out for all these recyclables. There is a market for these, including, say, the waste paper and so on. Now, in the past, the mainland authorities are having more lenient standards. Now they are tightening the standards. They are only accepting clean materials. So in the whole process was the government's role and responsibility. Don't you think you should consider the difficulties of the market and try to, through government policy, help out and maybe offer some economic incentives and tactics to promote the long-term development of the recycling industry? You can't achieve that just by offering an extra land plot or so, or maybe you have one or more community green stations in one district. That is no solution. I think the crux lies in how you can muster all the efforts of the entire community to help you. Hong Kong is a densely populated city, so if you just go by approach, that won't suffice. And what does the administration have any further strategies to promote clean recycling, source separation of waste? Do you want to do it by way of, say, legislating a hardline approach, or as what the Productivity Council suggests, you should make use of the recycling fund better, try to offer economic incentives so that the your goals could be achieved and promoted. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Wu, for your comments. Different recyclables should warrant different handling methods. For example, for scrap paper and waste plastics, they should be dealt with differently. Well, the waste metal and waste paper have their, say, own market value. And because there are certain market forces behind these markets. So the government has not been doing a lot, and we just focusing on waste plastics in the past. But now times have changed, and we are coming up with different methods to deal with different wastes. For example, for the we have the producer responsibility system, and for the waste plastic bottles, we have different methods of dealing with them as well. And for waste plastics, as I said before, our main consideration is on the transport costs, and the government is actively considering introducing a central collection system for waste plastics so that we can minimize the transport costs and help the trade to operate more effectively. Now, concerning the waste paper, I think it has to do with land issue, and we are providing temporary land plots and temporary piers and so on, so that we can help the trade in their operations. In the long term, we will continue with our publicity and public education efforts. Let me reiterate this. We have looked at the different environmental protection requirements in different countries, and not only the mainland, other countries are also lifting their standards or requirements. And in the long run, we want to help the local trade so that they can build premises for recycling operations, so that the local recyclables can be turned into useful resources. Maybe recycled paper can be produced. So this is a long-term direction that we'll be heading towards. The last one, Mr. Eddie G, 4 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to have a dialogue with Mr. Falk. Mr. Falk referred to the Hong Kong Estate RCP, and under the present design or plan, there will be a 5 to 6 story building. Mr. Falk thinks that if above the RCP, community facilities are going to be built, then there will be opposition. Now, in terms of the location, as mentioned by Mr. Falk, well, a lot of residents are opposing the location, and I think we can be maybe be flexible in the location, selected location. Can we change our mindset? There are three different scenarios. First is the FEHD's RCP. A lot of Hong Kong people don't like them. The second scenario is the recycling shops on the streets. People don't like them either. What about the third category of recycling facilities? Maybe, well, the more reuse can be encouraged, say for books and say food items, furniture, and other materials. These are not dealt with by way of, say, a source separation of waste. And the CGS is working on these materials, I believe. So in your design of RCP, since you have a few more stories, why don't you think of better ways to use these stories? Don't just turn them over for use by LCSD. just add in some recycling facilities, and that can change the perception of people towards RCPs as well. Now, you have maybe on the ground floor, you have an advanced RCP with no odor problem, and then on the second, third, fourth, or fifth floor, then you can have a recycling center. People can come and say to swap goods there and so on. Then that will create a positive perception of the entire building. So don't just put the bad or not so good, undesirable facilities together with the RCP. Put in some positive facilities. This will very much be an education process as well. Well, just to have some turnover of recyclables there at this building, and then people can find some good use to the facility. At Hong Kong Estate, I hope that you can consider this actively. And I think you should not be so rigid in your approach towards the Yau Ma Tei facility as well. We can further discuss it at the FC. Mr. Fock. Thank you, Mr. Ji, for your comment. People may have misunderstanding towards RCP, and I look forward to legislators in helping us with explaining the situation to RCP. Well, the RCP has a deodorization system, is an advanced design and so on, and there are not many vehicles going in and out. And if on other stories of the RCP building we are going to have recycling facilities, and we have to talk to the EPD. As I said, this doesn't fall within the portfolio of the RVHD. So what do you plan to do on the second to the fifth floor? Well, the office. Because in Yuen Long, we have more staff in the Yuen Long district, and we are lacking office space. So that's why we are planning it to be used as an office, and we need a space for storing files and so on, and records. So indeed there is a need for us to use these upper floors of the RZB to store records. Now we are just left with 4 minutes. I wonder whether you have had time to read through the report. Well, thank you very much, the administration team. Perhaps you may now leave, and thank you very much for your hard work in the past year. Thank you very much. Now, on the draft report of the subcommittee, every year, after the subcommittee has done with our work, we will submit a draft report to the House Committee. We have discussed various subjects, the design of RCP, as mentioned by Mr. Eddie G. Pages 5, 6, and 7, and 8 have touched on this subject. And Mr. Wu Chi-wai's concern is about the CGES and also price subsidies for recyclables. Starting from page 17, we've been striving for this for a long time. So we have discussed this, the collection system today. So if we think that the report is good enough, then we'll endorse it, and then we'll submit it to the House Committee. Well, the subcommittee would end our work in November. And if I recall correctly, then we will not continue with our work. So that's why we have come up with this draft report. So any views on this draft report or any other requests? Mr. Eddie J. We will not have other meetings, right? Further meetings? Yes. Last time, we said that we would consider holding another meeting, and that's why we are having this meeting today, discussing the request from your letter. And in the past, the draft report was just being circulated for members' comments. But since we are having or meeting today, maybe we can also discuss this draft report briefly today. Do you think there is a need to revise the report? Any additions, deletions proposed? So we will be submitting it to the panel, Environmental Affairs panel. And very soon we will have the first meeting of the panel to elect the chairman and vice chairman. And after that, there will be regular meetings held. And at those meetings, the report of the subcommittee will be confirmed. So if members don't have any particular views, maybe you can read it afterward, the report afterwards. And if you have any views, you can submit the same to the Secretariat afterwards. I think they've been doing a great job in coming up with this report, and I would like to thank the members of the Subcommittee and the Secretariat and also the Research Division for coming up with a very good research so that we can have focused discussion on all these matters. So if you have any views on this draft report, please submit them to the Secretariat. And also members, Secretary staff, and also staff from the Research Division, good health and best wishes. And if needed, you can further liaise with the Secretariat. So that's it for this meeting. Thank you.